Chapter 2146. Yi Muyun didn't say anything. He just picked up his phone and said to Zhang Xini calmly, "Send a set of clothes over." Zhang Xini was stunned for a moment. "Mr. Yi, where is it? And the size?" Yi Muyun glanced at Song Karen and said calmly, "It's Miss Song." Zhang Xini was stunned again. Had Mr. Yi decided to be with Song Karen for real? He was at Tang Sher's place yesterday. Had he changed again last night? Zhang Xini was happy to see such a change. She immediately prepared the clothes and sent them to Yi Muyun's apartment. When she arrived, she rang the doorbell. It was Yi Muyun who came out to open the door, still in his bathrobe. Zhang Xini pursed her lips and handed him the bag. Yi Muyun said calmly, "I'll send Miss Song back in a while." Zhang Xini guessed that Song Karen's wishful thinking last night was probably one-sided. She pursed her lips and stood guard outside. Yi Muyun closed the door and put the paper bag on the table. "Get changed." Song Karen looked at him. When he spoke, his eyes didn't fall on her. They had been together for 2 years, but now they were still like strangers. Song Karen choked with sobs. "Muyun, is there really no possibility between us?" He didn't say anything. Song Karen bit her lips and finally changed her clothes and left. When she walked to the door, she saw Zhang Xini. Song Karen wasn't very familiar with this secretary. And instinctively, she didn't like Zhang Xini either. She always felt that there was too much ambition in her eyes. No woman would like their boyfriend to have a secretary who was too capable. Song Karen was the same. So after she went out, she didn't talk to Zhang Xini. She just sat in the car and looked out of the window. Zhang Xini held the steering wheel and smiled casually. "Miss Song, do you know Mr. Ye's past?" Song Karen tilted his head and looked at Zhang Xini. Zhang Xini smiled faintly. "Unfortunately, I know." Song Karen's gaze was burning. "You know about it?" Her voice sounded a little arrogant. From the bottom of her heart, she looked down on Zhang Xini, because she was just a secretary. "Yes," Zhang Xini said calmly. "Mr. Yi loved a girl, and he loved her for many years." Song Karen started to believe her a little. Biting her lower lip, she asked, "How did they get separated?" Zhang Xini gave a hollow laugh. "It's hard to imagine that Mr. Yi would be ditched." "That's not what I want to hear." Song Karen's voice was somewhat angry. At this moment, it happened to be a red light. Zhang Xini stopped the car, turned her head and smiled. "I'm afraid that you won't be able to take it if I tell you all at once. After all, this news is even more shocking to you than Mr. Yi breaking up with you." "Who is she?" Song Karen narrowed his eyes and said firmly. Zhang Xini looked at the flashing red lights in front of her. Her lips curled into a cold smile. "That person is back." Song Karen was stunned and said very slowly, "So, he wants to break up with me." It turned out that after so long, she was just a spare tire. Now that the person in his heart was back, she immediately lost her value. Was it because he was afraid of misunderstanding, so he couldn't wait to break up with her? Song Karen closed her eyes, unwilling to believe such cruelty. Chapter 2147. She sneered and said word by word, "Who is the one who just returned to the country? Who is the one who is devastatingly beautiful? Who is the one who made CEO Yi unable to control himself and everything went wrong?" Zhang Xini said a few words and Song Karen was completely stunned. She murmured, "It's Ann." Ann and Muyun knew each other. She was beautiful enough. It was her. It was actually her. Song Karen laughed and cried at the same time. Gosh, how silly was she to say that she wanted to seduce Yi Muyun in front of Ann. In the end, Ann was the one who sent her to Yi Muyun's apartment. Why didn't Ann talk about their past? Why did she watch her make a fool of herself? She knew that Yi Muyun still had feelings for her. Why did she humiliate her like this? Song Karen clenched her fists and didn't say a word. Zhang Xini smiled. She didn't admit or deny it. The car drove all the way back to Song Karen's apartment. When Song Karen got out of the car, her legs were weak. The car window wound down and Zhang Xini said calmly, "Miss Song, I just don't want to see you trying to redeem her like a fool." They grew up together and were engaged. Mr. Yi loves Tang Sher for almost 20 years. They only broke up temporarily, but Mr. Yi can't forget her. With that, Zhang Xini rolled up the car window and drove away. Song Karen stood there and chuckled, "Yeah, 20 years. How can I compare with her? They broke up and she was destined to be cannon fodder. Why did Ann come back? Why would a man and woman who broke up meet again? So, I'm a fool." Song Karen chuckled, "I actually invited her back with my own hands. Ann came back because she knew that she was Yi Muyun's girlfriend, right? Ann, what are your intentions?" Song Karen's eyes were filled with hatred. She returned to her apartment and looked at her face in the mirror. It was so beautiful, but it couldn't attract Yi Muyun. Song Karen smiled faintly and took out a small pipette from his medical bag. Then, he faced the mirror and did something to his neck. "Ann, I will not allow myself to lose so badly." After she was done, she looked at the red mark on her neck. It looked like a hickey. Her smile deepened as her fingers gently stroked the red marks. Her voice was especially soft as she said, "If Ann sees this, she'll definitely feel terrible." As she spoke, her smile was a little strange. As he stared at his neck, he made a call to Snow GM Hotel. Cher didn't fall asleep until dawn. When her phone rang, she instinctively wanted to stuff it under her pillow, but the phone kept ringing. She had no choice but to pick it up. It was a call from Song Karen, and it was also a call that she didn't want to answer the most right now. She did not make a sound. Song Karen's excited voice could be heard from the other side of the phone, and, "Last night, did I get pregnant?" Cher rubbed her aching head. There was no expression on her face. After a while, she said softly, "Maybe." Song Karen suddenly turned from a smart and capable woman to a little girl. "Last night, he did it 5 times. 5 times. Cher was a little dazed. She smiled absent-mindedly and said slowly after a long time, "Congratulations." Chapter 2148. Cher lay flat and put her fingers on her eyes. After a while, she said softly, "I have something to talk to you about." Song Karen smiled. "Shall we have lunch together?" Finally, they decided on the time and place. Cher threw her cell phone away and covered her face with the quilt. She lay there for a long time but could not fall asleep. She simply sat up and leaned against the headboard in a daze. They had done it 5 times. She touched her eyes with her fingertips and her fingers were trembling. At this moment, she felt that all her memories of the past with him had disappeared. Her palm-sized face rested on her knees and her eyes were cautious. At this moment, she seemed to have become an 18-year-old girl again. At this moment, she felt that she had finally lost him. Completely lost. In fact, she had lost him long ago, hadn't she? Cher smiled, but her long eyelashes blinked and a tear fell. When she went out at noon, her face was very pale because she had not slept well. She had to put on some honey powder, but she was still not angry. "What do I care? Maybe this is the last time we meet." Cher smiled at the mirror. "Maybe I won't come back to City B anymore. Maybe I shouldn't have come back." Cher picked a white Lamborghini from the underground parking lot of GM and drove to the restaurant where she had an appointment with Song Karen. The car stopped and she got out of the car and walked in. Song Karen was already there. She was sitting there and ordering food gently. When Snow sat down, she heard Song Karen say very gently to the waiter that there was another gentleman who would be arriving a little later, and that his dishes would be served in half an hour. When she said this, Song Karen's eyes seemed to sparkle with countless little stars, filled with love. Also, the hickeys on her neck were so big and entrenched on her fair skin. She could imagine how crazy they had been last night. Cher lowered her head and laughed at herself. 5 times. She pursed her lips and waited quietly for Song Karen to order. "And, what do you want? What do you want?" Song Karen suddenly turned his head and asked. Cher said calmly, "A sturgeon set meal." Song Karen exclaimed softly, "You have the same taste as Mu Yun." On the other side, the waiter looked at the order machine in his hand with a puzzled expression. It was clearly different, all right. However, the customer was God, so he naturally wouldn't say it out loud. Cher only smiled faintly. "Really?" Song Karen smiled sweetly and said a few words to the waiter before turning around. "And, did you drink too much last night? Did you sleep well after you got home?" Cher shook her head. "I only drank a little." "It's okay. But I see. You don't look well." Song Karen said with concern. "Thank you for your hard work," and she puts her palm on the back of Cher's hand. "I really don't know what to do without you." Cher remained silent. Song Karen continued, looking a little shy. "Although there's someone else in Mu Yun's heart, he accepted me last night. I think we'll be together." She placed her finger on her lower abdomen. "If we can have a child, will he propose to me?" Cher's expression was indifferent. "I think so. I think so too." Song Karen directly turned into a naive and sweet person. "And you don't know how charming his expression is when he loves me. Although it's a little rough, but..." Chapter 2149. She lowered her voice and said, "It hurts the first time, but afterwards, it feels good." She then frowned and said, "Don't you think he's very experienced?" Cher didn't want to talk about this with her because every word was stabbing at her heart. However, Song Karen, who was immersed in her own happiness, didn't seem to notice her strangeness and continued to say sweetly, "I believe he will fall in love with me in the future." Cher smiled even more lightly. She held the water in her hand and took a sip. That plain water also had a bitter taste. Song Karen flipped her curly hair and said seductively, "And, do you mind being Mu Yun and my bridesmaid? You're so beautiful that you'll definitely charm a lot of people." "Maybe not." Cher said calmly, "I'll be returning to America in 2 days. I've thought about the galleries matter carefully. I still don't like to be tied down. So, after this exhibition, our collaboration will end." Song Karen's eyes widened and she looked shocked. "And we agreed. Do you think the conditions aren't good enough or that my scale isn't big enough?" She said anxiously, "Mu Yun said he would invest and will only get better and better." Cher looked down and said, "My focus is still in America." She raised her face and let out a faint smile. "That's it then. I'll skip dinner. I have an appointment later." As she spoke, she stood up and prepared to leave. Song Karen stood up almost immediately and reached out to hold Cher's hand. "And, do you have a problem with me?" "No." Cher said calmly, "I'm just not used to life in B City." At this moment, she was like a deserter who couldn't wait to escape back to America and treat her wounds like she did 8 years ago. She was the one who sent Song Karen to his apartment. Song Karen got what he wanted, but her heart hurt. The wound that she thought had healed turned out to be never healed. Now, she felt that it was bleeding. Song Karen had a look of pity on his face. He stared into her eyes and slowly said, "If that's the case, I'll lose the best artist." Cher forced a smile. "I'm not the best." Song Karen continued to look into her eyes with sincerity, "And, in my heart, you are the best. Your painting of a rainy night is the most profound painting I have ever seen." Cher shook her head gently, already planning to burn it later. That kind of rainy night would never happen again. Why would she keep it? She took 2 steps back and pursed her lips. "Goodbye, Miss Song." Song Karen hugged her. "And I'll miss you." However, Snow could vaguely smell Yimuyun's scent on her body. It was the scent of the cologne that he was used to using. How long did they linger after they put on their clothes at dawn? That kind of crazy imagination flashed through her mind again and again. When she left, her heart was full of sorrow. Behind her, Song Karen's eyes became cold. Zheng Xinyi was wrong. Not only did Yimuyun still love Anne, but Anne had never forgotten Yimuyun in her heart. She was the only one who was a fool. Now, Anne thought that she had slept with Yimuyun and escaped back to America. She thought that it was a powerful opponent, but it was just a little girl. Chapter 2150. She had underestimated Yimuyun's 8 years of yearning and hatred. How could it be erased with a single kiss? She sat at the dining table and placed lunch for 3 on the table while Song Karen ate alone. She ate with extreme elegance, just like in love. She had to fight off her opponent gracefully. Not only did she want her to scram back to America, she wanted her to have no place in the art world. Song Karen thought of that rainy night, and chuckled out gently as she swallowed a spoonful of salad. Plagiarizing the work of an international master was a sensational scandal. Cher walked out of the restaurant without driving. That was because she knew that something bad would happen if she were to drive. She walked slowly on the streets. The sky had darkened and it was raining, but she did not notice it at all. The raindrops drenched her petite face, and there was a line of water droplets on her eyelashes. She raised her head. The sky was gray, and it was raining. It was just like that rainy night. Was the sky crying as well? She laughed at herself for being silly. After so many years, she had clearly said that she didn't care. Why was she crying when he slept with someone else for a night? Tang Cher, he didn't belong to you since a long time ago. Why did you still care so much? At this moment, she was that 18-year-old girl, the girl who had been abandoned. She suddenly felt like crying out loud. On the streets of B City. She squatted down slowly and hugged her knees tightly. She had thought that she was strong enough, but she couldn't even withstand a single blow. Tang Cher, you promised to make him happy and not disturb him. She cried and ignored the strange gazes of the passers-by. A black limousine came to a stop beside her, and a pair of long legs stepped out. Zhou Chongguang was dressed elegantly. He was supposed to be attending an important dinner, but he caught sight of her. He had initially thought that it was just her back view and hair. But when she raised her head, he was stunned. Tang Cher. He called out her name subconsciously. Time froze. He looked at this girl who was doted on by time. She still looked like she was 18 years old and had not changed at all. His heart was ruthlessly struck. The place that he thought was already hard became soft and powerless. After so many years, he was used to seeing all kinds of women who looked like her. Some had similar eyebrows, some eyes, and some lips. He had enjoyed them one by one, but now he realized that none of them could compare to her. She was still herself, but those women were not like her at all. He slowly walked closer and squatted down. His fingers gently touched her little face. It was cold. As if possessed, he asked, "Are you lost?" He remembered that she didn't know the way and was always confused. Was she unable to find her way home now? Cher looked up and saw Zhou Chongguang. He had changed, he was no longer the same as before, he had become a complete businessman, and she felt strange. She said softly, "I can't find you, Muyun." She was still lying on the ground, her face tilted as she stared at him. "You're the one who prevented me from finding him." As Cher said that, she stood up slowly and raised her hand. Just like that, a slap landed on Zhou Chongguang's handsome face. He received that slap head-on. "I've said it before, if you were to mess around with Gu Mei, I'll never let you off, neither will I." Cher pursed her lips and laughed out coldly, "But, you've ruined Qin Mu for so many years." Zhou Chongguang wiped his lips gently and chuckled out, "Do you still understand her now?" Qin Mu had long since stopped caring. Chapter 2151. Cher stared into Zhou Chongguang's eyes for a long time before she suddenly smiled. "Zhou Chongguang, I don't need to understand." Just as they had said, Qin Mu was going to divorce him. In the end, she still had nothing. Cher propped herself up and stood up slowly, facing Zhou Chongguang on the cold street. Time seemed to have returned to 8 years ago, when she had no choice but to protect him. And 8 years later, all that was left was hatred. "Zhou Chongguang, you once had everything, but you didn't cherish it, or perhaps you thought it wasn't worth cherishing." Cher's voice was cold. Some people spend their entire lives just to have someone who loves them. And Zhou Chongguang had easily destroyed everything, turning her sacrifice into a joke. Zhou Chongguang looked at her in a daze and said in a hoarse voice, "Tang Cher, can we be friends again?" Cher laughed softly. "Zhou Chongguang, what do you think?" Zhou Chongguang's face was ashen. After a long time, he smiled and said, "You're right. A person like me doesn't deserve to have friends." How could she still be friends with him after he had taken away her happiness? He had been too naive for once. Zhou Chongguang smiled and looked around. "I'll send you back. You don't look well." "I'll walk alone no matter what," Cher said calmly. Then she turned around and walked in the opposite direction. She left without any hesitation. Zhou Chongguang, on the other hand, was still standing at his original place, watching the whole time. It was as if he had returned to the past, to the days when he was still in school. It was drizzling, but Zhou Chongguang felt that it couldn't wash away his sins. All these years, he had regretted it, especially when she hadn't come back for 8 years. He wondered if he had done something wrong. Was it too cruel to her? At that time, she was only an 18-year-old girl, but because of his anger, her life changed. When they met again, she was the same as before, just a little calmer. He thought of Qin Mu, his wife. The one who changed the most was probably Qin Mu. From loving him to not loving him. Zhou Chongguang suddenly raised his voice and stared at the distant figure. "Tang Cher, do you still love him?" The first thing that responded to him was her stiff back. Cher stopped, but she didn't turn around. She stood there for so long that he thought she would not speak. Then she said, "Zhou Chongguang, if love is so easy to erase, then it is not love." Zhou Chongguang's body trembled. "Is that so? If it's easy to erase, then it's not love. What about Qin Mu? Was she the same, unable to be erased?" But he actually minded that it was erased. Was it because she didn't love him that much in the past? Zhou Chongguang was a little confused. He stood there in a daze, watching the slender figure leave. Snow walked faster and faster, faster and faster. Then, she cried. "Damn Zhou Chongguang, annoying Zhou Chongguang." When they returned to the hotel, the receptionist said gently, "Miss Tang, Miss Qin has been waiting for you for over an hour." Cher looked a little disheveled. Her eyes were a little swollen and her nose was red. Hearing the receptionist's words, she looked up in confusion. Then, she saw Qin Mu. Chapter 2152. With just one glance, Cher felt that Qin Mu knew how to take care of herself. At least, Qin Mu was a woman who was ready to get divorced, which was much better than her current situation. She didn't want to be a joke, and she thought that Qin Mu also had something to say to her, so Cher smiled lightly. "Let's talk in my room." Qin Mu nodded, got up, and walked to Cher. Before Cher could react, Qin Mu had already reached out and hugged her a little tightly. There was a touch of uncontrollable emotion in that strength. "You're back." Qin Mu buried her face in Cher's neck and murmured, "It's been so many years. How have you been?" Cher's body stiffened, and she didn't say anything. Just as Qin Mu said, so many years had passed, and everything had changed. Facing Qin Mu, Cher felt a little unfamiliar. As if feeling her resistance, Qin Mu closed her eyes slightly, but still pretended to be relaxed and let go of her. "Let's talk in the room." Cher looked at her silently and walked into the elevator first. Qin Mu immediately followed. As soon as the elevator closed, the dignified Qin Mu disappeared, and she hugged Cher like a little wolf dog and didn't let go. "Qin Mu," Cher said in a low voice, "you weren't so clingy when you were 14. You weren't so cold to me when I was 14. Qin Mu pouted and directly turned into a 14-year-old child, clinging to Cher. Cher couldn't do anything, and she couldn't push her away, so she could only let her hug her. However, she kept a straight face. It wasn't that she hated Qin Mu, but she didn't know how to get close to Qin Mu. If she got too close, she would definitely get close to Yi Muyun. This was what she didn't want, and it was probably Qin Mu's purpose. Qin Mu's thoughts were easy to understand. She wanted to divorce Zhou Chongguang, so she felt that she should be with Yi Muyun now. But it was impossible. Cher opened the door and walked in first. She asked Qin Mu softly, "Have you eaten?" Qin Mu shook her head. "Not yet." Cher took off her coat. "I'll order a meal first. I'm a little hungry now, so I might not be in the mood to talk." Qin Mu pursed her lips and did not dare to object. Cher must have known why she was here. However, Cher's expression was very ugly. Did something happen? Just as Qin Mu was in a daze, Cher ordered 2 Western-style dishes and washed her face. When she returned to the living room, there was a knock on the door. She opened the door and the waiter pushed the food cart in. Seeing that Qin Mu was there, he left quickly. "Eat first," Cher said softly before sitting down. She was wearing a Chanel dress. It was retro and elegant, a little different from before. Qin Mu looked at her fixedly, not eating for a long time. "If you've eaten, then don't force yourself," Cher said softly. Qin Mu put down her fork immediately. "I've eaten." Cher looked at her and did not say anything else. She just continued eating. She ate quickly and elegantly, finishing her lunch in 10 minutes. Qin Mu was a little stunned. Cher was not like this in the past. She was always picky about food and would only eat properly if her brother forced her to. Perhaps sensing Qin Mu's gaze, Cher wiped her lips and smiled. People change. Without someone to rely on, they have to grow up on their own. Chapter 2153. She looked at Qin Mu and went straight to the point. "Qin Mu, whether you're doing well or not doesn't have much to do with your brother and I," she said in a low voice. "After you and Zhou Chongguang got married, I could totally come back, but I didn't." Qin Mu looked a little lost in thought. Cher revealed a bitter smile. "Sometimes, when you walk out, you can't come back." When I left, I thought I could come back. But when I walked out, I realized that I couldn't. It's not because of you or Zhou Chongguang. It's because something happens every day. Cher said everything in one breath. Qin Mu was stunned. Cher, what happened to you? Cher lowered her eyes and said in a low voice after a while, I'm sorry. I don't want to talk about it. Qin Mu's eyes were blurred and she didn't know what to do. She had a feeling that this story had something to do with her brother. Her heart was beating wildly. She used all her strength to ask, do you still like him? What responded to her was a long period of silence. After a long time, Cher replied, some things are more important than liking someone. Qin Mu was stunned. Did Shua find someone more important than her brother, or did something happen to her? She couldn't say much. In fact, she shouldn't have come today. She had come here shamelessly. She would have been snubbed in the future, but Cher didn't. She was so friendly and calm that it made her want to cry. I don't know what to say. I think you should be the one saying those words to you. Qin Mu said in a low voice, but I'm sorry. Qin Mu didn't cry. She just smiled bitterly. She laughed at her ignorance and at her helplessness, but no matter how sorry she was, she couldn't exchange for her brother's happiness. Cher's expression was very calm. Qin Mu, just be good in the future. There were too many words between them, but they couldn't say them out loud. In the end, Qin Mu still left. When she left, she seemed to be in a daze. She had a feeling that Cher had really given up on her brother. It wasn't because of Song Karen's existence, but because she didn't want to be with him anymore. On the way back, Qin Mu sat in the car and listened to the music in the car, quietly spacing out. She recalled a lot of things, not her past with Zhou Chongguang, but her brother and Cher's past. Those childhood sweethearts, all vanished into thin air because of her existence. When Qin Mu returned to Wenhua Hotel, her face was cold and full of tears. As soon as she got out of the car, she received a call from Zhou Chongguang. She stood in the atrium of the hotel, listening to Zhou Chongguang's voice. Qin Mu, do you have time? I want to see you. Qin Mu paused for a moment and then said, if it's a divorce, I'm free at any time. There was a moment of silence on the other end. I just want to show you something. Qin Mu didn't say a word. Zhou Chongguang said, I promise I won't do anything, and I won't force you. Okay, where are you? Qin Mu said, her voice a little hoarse. Zhou Chongguang paused for a moment and said, I'll get someone to pick you up. Qin Mu didn't reject him. I'm at Wenhua Hotel. Less than 10 minutes after she hung up, the car arrived. She understood that Zhou Chongguang was very clear about her whereabouts, and he probably knew about her meeting with Cher. So the reason why he asked her to go was most likely related to Cher. Qin Mu got into the car. Less than half an hour later, the car stopped. Chapter 2154. 2 days ago, she put the house up for sale, and later said that the house was sold. Now, the house was already someone else's. The driver was Zhou Chongguang's man, and he said congratulatively, Madam, Mr. Zhou is waiting inside. Qin Mu opened the door and got out of the car. The moment she got out of the car, the water in the little angel fountain in the villa's garden was all turned on. The water splashed under the sun, and the little angel was singing happily. At this time, Qin Mu found that the sun had come out, and the sky was blue. It was even a little hot, and the temperature was a little high. She slowly walked up the stairs, walking in the place that she was most familiar with, and also the place that hurt the most. This was the place where she and Zhou Chongguang got married on their wedding night. This was the place where she first heard that he had a relationship with Gu Mei. She stayed here night after night, and later saw in the small newspaper that he lingered in the boudoir of a small star. The memory of this house was so deep that she didn't want to live here anymore. In her heart, she vaguely guessed something, and she just needed to confirm it later. Qin walked in. The large hall was the same as before, and even cleaner and brighter than when she was here. In the high hall, there was a sunflower that she had loved for a long time. The things that she had asked the servants to throw away were all put back in their original places. There was even a single photo of her in her wedding photo on the small table, arranged with a crystal photo frame. Everything looked as if they were still living together. And the man who directed the magic, a young man in home clothes, sat in front of the piano in front of the floor-to-ceiling window, playing an elegant tune with his slender fingers. At this time, his side profile was gentle, and the sun shone on his face, washing away the philistinism left by many years in the business world. His entire facial features were flushed like water, he was very focused, and his eyes were always looking at the piano score. This was the scene that Qin had been longing to see after their marriage. But in the 4 years of marriage, he had not touched the piano even once, except for cleaning by the servants. After a long time, she probably understood in her heart. Qin stood still, and didn't run away like last time. Her voice was hoarse. "Zhou Chongguang, what do you mean?" The sound of the piano stopped. He gently closed the lid, turned sideways, and looked at her quietly. "I bought this place." Qin didn't say anything. He bought this place, but it didn't mean anything. "I've tried to find all the original things. There's only one thing left." His eyes were burning. "Mumu, you're the only one left here." Qin smiled faintly. "Gu Mei or Lin Shui, the woman behind CEO Zhou, you can just pick any one of them to move in." He looked at her and said calmly, "Gu Mei has been sent to a branch abroad. Lin Shui, I gave her a check of 10 million yuan. Qin chuckled lightly. "Zhou Chongguang, not every prodigal son has a devoted woman who is willing to wait for him." Lin Shui, Tang Xing. Zhou Chongguang held his chin and looked at her quietly. After a while, he smiled. "Qin, you're in a hurry to divorce me. Isn't it because of Tang Shi?" Qin face changed slightly. "Because she's back, you can't wait to divorce so that your good brother can be together." Zhou Chongguang said softly, "Let me tell you, they're unlikely." Chapter 2155. Qin suddenly exploded. He picked up something beside him and threw it at Zhou Chongguang. Bang! It landed beside Zhou Chongguang. "That's great. You can still chase after Cher after we get divorced. After playing with so many doubles, isn't President Zhou sick of it?" Qin seemed to have gotten angry out of nowhere. As he spoke, he threw things at him. "Save your affectionate face for someone else. I won't fall for it." Qin finally threw a crystal photo of herself at him. This time, Zhou Chongguang didn't dodge and was hit on the forehead. Over there, a patch of green and purple had been smashed out. Qin was also stunned. Zhou Chongguang didn't care. He just reached out to touch it and smiled at her. "Qin, you're cute when you're jealous." "Who's jealous?" Qin glared at him angrily and then walked out. "You can live here if you like. You can bring whoever you want back. Anyway, you've bought it." However, Zhou Chongguang had already taken her hand and said in a low voice, "We're still husband and wife. Everything I have is our joint property. Mumu, this is still your home." He didn't use much strength to hold her, as if he was afraid of hurting her. Qin struggled a little, and he tightened his grip again, just to make sure that he didn't hurt her. "Mumu, I used to mess around. But you should have told me earlier." Zhou Chongguang sighed. "Forgive me once, okay? His words were so nice that Qin Mu was in a trance. Forgive me once. Then who would forgive her? Then, what were those difficult nights she had gone through? Zhou Chongguang, you don't love me, but you use me. She chuckled. Or do you want to have a lighter taste after you've been with so many women? Zhou Chongguang was just holding her hand, but now he slid it down her arm to her shoulder and pressed it gently. This time, I'm serious. Okay. Qin Mu said calmly, fire Gu Mei. I want half of your shares in glory. Zhou Chongguang frowned. You know that Gu Mei has been in prison for me for several years, and the family won't agree with me. Qin Mu just smiled lightly. Zhou Chongguang, I was almost moved just now. I thought I was very important to you, but it turns out that I'm just a so-so. Zhou Chongguang narrowed his eyes. Mu, don't mess around. I'm not fooling around. Qin Mu said very seriously, Zhou Chongguang, what I want is wholeheartedly, what I want is everything. And you can't give it to me. Don't pretend that you can give me the whole world. You can't give it to anyone, because your world is not complete. After saying that, Qin Mu struggled to get rid of him. That's it. Goodbye. Zhou Chongguang pursed his lips and didn't say anything. He watched her walk out. After she left, he leaned against the back of the sofa, took out a cigarette, and lit it quietly. Qin Mu was different from before. She was no longer his shy little wife. She couldn't wait to soar high, and how could he let go? She had become a habit of his side. Without her, he felt empty. When he saw Tang Sher, his heart was palpitating, and even his heart was moved. But when it came to life, he still felt that it was more natural to keep Qin Mu by his side. Chapter 2156. But what could he do? She seemed to be determined to leave him. Zhou Chongguang smiled gently. His smile was a little deep, making it hard to tell what he was really thinking. Just then, his phone rang. He looked down and saw that it was a call from Gu Mei. He paused for a moment, but still picked it up. Gu Mei's low voice came from the other end. Chongguang, I want to see you. Zhou Chongguang pursed his thin lips. Gu Mei, you know why I asked you to leave, right? Gu Mei was silent for a while before she said softly, isn't it easier to fire me? If you want. His answer was very cold and heartless. Gu Mei sobbed softly, and after a long time, she said softly, I just want to see you. Zhou Chongguang thought for a moment and said slowly, Gu Mei, I won't sleep with you. Gu Mei seemed to be laughing at herself. Of course. Zhou Chongguang put away the phone and walked out of the villa. He had been very unfair to Gu Mei from the beginning. When she was in prison, he was with Qin Mu and did not visit her even once. She came out of prison and became his secretary. On the night she was inaugurated, they had sex. It was not Gu Mei's first time, and neither was he. He had long been numb to the affairs between men and women because of the things he did in the business world. After sleeping with her that day, he leaned on the bed and smoked, feeling that he had completed a mission. It was to repay her. A year before he married Qin Mu, he and Gu Mei had been together. Of course, they did not have sex often. Because he had too many social engagements, Gu Mei was often not in line. After he got married, he had some small celebrities, and his relationship with Gu Mei became even more shallow. They became more and more like a boss and a female secretary, until Gu Mei could not stand it anymore. Zhou Chongguang was very clear that the reason why Qin Mu knew so much about him was because of Gu Mei. But he could not blame Gu Mei. In his heart, he felt guilty to Gu Mei. He could not blame a woman who had given herself completely to him. Sometimes, he also found it strange. Qin Mu was clearly an even more innocent girl than Gu Mei, so why could he be so ruthless towards Qin Mu? He thought that because she was Yi Muyun's younger sister, he couldn't let go of her whenever he faced her. Especially when they were on the bed, looking at that little face that was as beautiful as a painting, he couldn't control his mind and couldn't help but become rough. She cried out in pain. Later on, she became afraid of him. There was a period of time when his relationship with Qin Mu was not harmonious, probably because of his psychological effects. Zhou Chongguang got into his car and drove to the place Gu Mei had mentioned. It was a private room in a club. When he pushed the door open, Gu Mei was already singing karaoke on the sofa with 2 bottles of wine in front of her. She looked up at Zhou Chongguang and smiled. "Did you go to see Qin Mu? You know I don't like people asking about my personal affairs." Zhou Chongguang's voice was very calm. Then, he sat down next to her. Gu Mei continued to sing Shui Zhiqian's Romance. She sang it quite well. Zhou Chongguang tilted his head and looked at her, his gaze a little indifferent. Gu Mei's position in his heart was different from that of Lin Shui and the other small celebrities. She was the person who had accompanied him through the lowest point. She had even sacrificed herself when he was expanding his business. It was not kind of him to banish her now. Chapter 2157. When Qin Mu mentioned firing Gu Mei, he didn't agree immediately. He didn't have feelings for Gu Mei, but he owed her. After Gu Mei finished singing, her eyes were bright. She leaned her head on Zhou Chongguang's shoulder and said softly, "Chongguang, I don't want to leave." Zhou Chongguang sat there without moving, his eyes fixed on the big screen. After a long time, he lowered his head and looked at the woman on his shoulder. "Gu Mei, find a good man and marry him." "I'm not your Mr. Right, I can't marry you." It would never be possible for him and Gu Mei. Even without Qin Mu, she was still Gu Zei's sister. Zhou Chongguang didn't trust anyone anymore. Back then, she could betray Yi Muyun for him, and she might betray him in the future. Gu Mei was his business partner, but she was never his wife. The women outside were alluring, but they were just playthings. A person like Qin Mu would be perfect at home. After Zhou Chongguang said that, Gu Mei was a little dazed. She asked softly, "Did Qin Mu suggest it?" For some reason, Zhou Chongguang spoke for Qin Mu. "No. She doesn't have that kind of intention, she just wants to leave me." "Gu Mei, I've let you down now, I can make it up to you." Gu Mei was still dazed and didn't speak for a long time. "Glory's 10%, let's break up completely." Zhou Chongguang smiled bitterly. To Gu Mei, he could promise these things, but to Qin Mu, he would never talk about money. Because she was his wife, he didn't want to use money to save their marriage. Actually, he knew that if Qin Mu wasn't willing, he wouldn't be able to exchange everything for Qin Mu. Gu Mei blinked, and her makeup was a little messy. Her voice was a little shaky. "Chongguang. Gu Mei, if I fell in love with you all these years, I think I would do anything." Zhou Chongguang forced a smile and touched her long hair. "I still can't make up my mind. If this went on, it would be unfair to her." He didn't want to be fair, but the only one who was left was Qin Mu. It didn't matter if he was sorry or if he was a jerk, because she was his wife, she should accept it. Gu Mei's lips trembled. She stared at him for a long time and then chuckled. "So you're willing to come because you want to completely break off with me?" She held the glass with her fingers and drank the whole glass. After drinking, she looked at him. "Can you get drunk with me once?" Zhou Chongguang looked at her quietly and didn't make a sound. He just reached out for another cup on the table. After drinking 2 bottles of hard liquor, he faintly felt that something was wrong. His body was very hot, and there was something breaking out of the cocoon. It was a thirst that needed to be vented. Entangled, eager embrace, messy, their breathing was disordered, and the room was filled with decadence. This was the most primitive impulse between men and women. 2 hours later, Zhou Chongguang slowly woke up. He was lying on the sofa, and Gu Mei was lying on his chest, hugging him with her slender arms. The light was dim, and such a scene would make people feel confused. They were in love. Zhou Chongguang moved his body slowly and looked down at the woman in his arms. The last time he and Gu Mei did it was about half a year ago. He had never had any urges towards her body. She must have put something in the wine, what's the point? He sighed softly, sat up, and gently pushed her to the side. Chapter 2158. Zhou Chongguang had already started to put on his clothes. He said calmly, "I didn't take any protection just now. Remember to take your medicine later." Gu Mei was still sitting on the sofa. Her eyes looked hurt in the dark, but he couldn't see it. Actually, he had never seen her hurt. From the first time he saw her climb into a client's bed and use tricks to get a big order, she knew that he would never fall in love with her in this life. But she still couldn't bear to leave him. Just like just now, the 10% of glory was such a tempting offer. If she was smart, she would have agreed to it instead of doing something to make him angry. They did it, but she could tell that he didn't enjoy it. He was a little angry and wanted her to take her medicine. Every time they did it, she would obediently take her medicine. She didn't dare to have a child, because that would make him angry. She always foolishly thought that he didn't love Qin Mu and that they would divorce one day. She foolishly guarded him, not daring to do anything to make him unhappy. They snuggled up to each other and became demons together. Qin Mu, on the other hand, was still clean. Now that Qin Mu thought he was dirty, he wanted to be clean, but could he be clean? "And, Chongguang, is it really like what you said? You don't love Qin Mu at all? If you don't love Qin Mu, why did you spend so much effort to buy the villa and personally go to the garbage dump to pick up the things that Qin Mu threw away one by one?" Gu Mei laughed softly, and tears rolled down her cheeks. It turned out that it wasn't that she didn't love him enough, and it wasn't that she didn't work hard enough. It was that no matter how dirty a man did, the white moon in his heart would always be clean. In the parking lot of the club, Zhou Chongguang sat in the car and smoked. It wasn't his original intention to have sex with Gu Mei, but he didn't feel too guilty. After all, he had cheated many times after marriage. He really didn't lack this one. And now that he and Qin Mu were in conflict, it wasn't strange for him to have a woman. Before starting the car, he called Gu Mei again and said, "Don't delay the flight tomorrow." On the other side, Gu Mei didn't say anything. She just stared blankly. After a long time, he hung up the phone, started the car, and drove back to the villa. He took a shower and lay on the bed that he and Qin Mu had slept on countless times. When he closed his eyes, Qin Mu's bland and beautiful face would appear in his mind, so shy. He had clearly done it with Gu Mei 3 times, but at this time, he was still interested in his wife. Zhou Chongguang felt that he was a little crazy. He lay wondering how he could win her back. It seemed difficult, but not impossible. He knew that the only person she saw frequently was Zhao Yan. She liked to go to that restaurant to eat and listen to Zhao Yan play music. Zhou Chongguang sneered. Later, Qin Mu found that whenever she appeared in Zhao Yan's restaurant, Zhou Chongguang would always appear. This made Qin Mu very annoyed, and Zhao Yan could naturally see that Zhou Chongguang wanted to get back his wife. As an outsider, of course, he couldn't say too much. Sometimes, Zhou Chongguang would go up and play a few songs. After a long time, his skills came back. As Zhao Yan listened, his expression became a little thought-provoking. From Zhou Chongguang's song, he could hear the emotions. Chapter 2159. But now, Zhou Chongguang, who had been neglected for so many years, was much better than before. How could Xiao Yan not be surprised? When Qin Mu went to the bathroom, Xiao Yan asked, "Don't you plan to return to this circle? Your talent shouldn't be buried." Zhou Chongwang smiled and held the goblet with his slender fingers. "It's just a pastime for me now." Xiao Yan thought, picking up girls. It seems that only girls like Qin Mu like this. Other women prefer money, Zhou Chongwang said calmly. Xiao Yan stared at him and asked, "What about now?" Zhou Chongwang paused and said seriously, "There is no one else. Gu Mei was just an accident." Xiao Yan smiled and didn't say anything. After all, it was a matter between husband and wife, and he didn't want to interfere too much. But he thought of something. What about Cher? As Cher's uncle, Xiao Yan was qualified to make things difficult for Zhou Chongwang. Xiao Yan grew up with Yi Muyun and Cher, and he had seen them break up because of Zhou Chongwang, so Xiao Yan didn't have a good impression of Zhou Chongwang, not to mention that Zhou Zong had a lot of affairs in the past few years. It wasn't strange at all that Qin Mu wanted a divorce. Xiao Yan saw Qin Mu coming back from the bathroom, so he got up and left without saying anything. Qin Mu looked at Zhou Chongwang and said, "Zhou Chongwang, what do you want?" Zhou Chongwang smiled and said, "I have something to talk to you about." Qin Mu looked at him. "It's about your brother and Tang Cher." Zhou Chongwang's expression was a bit unpredictable. "I think you will be interested." He knew the little girl's thoughts, so he could easily control her. Sure enough, Qin Mu did not reject him immediately. She stared into his eyes. "These days, because you asked for a divorce, your brother didn't let go of the glory." Zhou Chongwang smiled faintly. "So do you think I can bear to divorce you?" Qin Mu's expression became extremely ugly as she scolded in a low voice, "You're despicable. Let's find a quiet place to talk." He suggested that this was an elegant restaurant, and what he wanted to do to her was not elegant at all. This was not a good place. Qin Mu stared at him for a long time. "Don't you want your brother and sister-in-law to get back together?" Zhou Chongwang smiled deeply and even reached out to pinch her little face. "Thinking about it, this should be what you want the most, right?" Qin Mu said softly, "Zhou Chongwang, you overestimate me. I'm the most selfish person. How can I sacrifice myself for others?" "Really?" Zhou Chongwang chuckled, "So you're even giving up this only chance?" Qin Mu pursed her lips and didn't say anything. He stood up. "Let's talk in my car." Qin Mu was an innocent girl, and she was tempted by him. She thought about it and agreed. She stood up and walked out to the parking lot. Zhou Chongwang drove a Land Rover Aurora today. He stood beside the car, looking more energetic and youthful. Qin Mu walked over slowly. "Let's talk here." As soon as she finished speaking, Zhou Chongwang had already opened the car door and pushed her in. "Zhou Chongwang, what are you doing?" She pushed him with her hand, but he had already locked the car door. Chapter 2160. It was dark in the car. The sound of any breathing was magnified countless times, and it sounded a little warm. Qin Mu's eyes were especially clear in the darkness. They were clean and clear. Zhou Chongwang's voice was a little hoarse. "Mu, I want to kiss you." As he spoke, his slender fingers had already pinched her sharp chin and fixed her in place. Qin Mu's body moved a little, but her little head couldn't move at all. She could only look at him and say angrily, "Zhou Chongwang, you're shameless. It's not against the law to kiss your wife." His voice was sexy and hoarse. "Maybe you can scream and sue me. Let's see if the police will interfere with a couple's sex." If it wasn't for the darkness, he could see that her little face was so red that it was about to bleed. However, he could still feel that her face was very hot. He knew her well. At this time, she must be ashamed and angry. Qin Mu was the most orthodox kind of girl, the very serious kind. Usually, she rarely took the initiative to do things between husband and wife with him. Sometimes, he wondered if she was cold. If it weren't for the fact that she would cry softly every time he went too far, he would have thought that she didn't feel anything at all. At this moment, he was secretly teasing her. He couldn't help but put down his crafty plot and taste her first. So he leaned over, took her little mouth, and kissed her thoroughly. His technique was very good, and he also knew what kind of style a shy young lady liked. At first, he had the intention to seduce her, but later, he himself had lost himself in the kiss, and threw himself into the kiss, thinking about how to please her and make her happy. Qin Mu began to struggle, and then she slowly lowered her little head. Her hands were entwined with his, and her little mouth naturally welcomed his existence. She hummed softly, and that soft voice was like a village medicine that stimulated him. If it weren't for the parking lot on the road, but underground, he would have taken her long ago. Zhou Chongguang kissed her for a long time. He kissed her little mouth, neck, and everything that could be kissed. After the kiss, it was already 10 minutes later. As soon as she was free, she slapped him. A clap resounded in the darkness. Instead of being annoyed, Zhou Chongguang chuckled and said, "Mumu, you obviously enjoyed it just now." She slapped him again, this time with so much force that her palm hurt. Despicable. Her breath was ragged and her legs were weak as she said it. She reached out to open the door, but he had locked it. Qin Mu was about to go crazy. "Zhou Chongguang, you bastard, open the door. Do you know what you look like now?" His voice was hoarse and hoarse. He turned on the lights in the car with one hand, and the car was instantly lit up with a warm yellow light. His fingers gently caressed her red lips. "Mumu, look at yourself." Qin Mu pursed her lips and glared at him. However, she still looked at herself through the rearview mirror. Her lips were bright red and even slightly swollen. Her eyes were glistening with tears. It was as if she had been loved. She knew that she would look like this after they had sex. No matter how reluctant she was sometimes, she would always be tortured like this in the end. "What will men think when they see you like this, huh?" He kissed the skin behind her ear and murmured, "Mumu, you never know how attractive you are." Chapter 2161. He paused for a moment. There won't be any more in the future. Gume has gone abroad, and those little celebrities are no longer interesting. So, I'm fine with it. Qin Mu closed her eyes. "I don't think you're interesting either. Tell me, who's interesting?" He kissed the corner of her mouth and couldn't help kissing her again. Qin Mu didn't resist. She let him kiss her, knowing that she couldn't escape. After a long time, when he was satisfied and left, she chuckled. "Will you kill him?" "You can try." Zhou Chongguang bit her lips and said, "Mumu, be good. I like it when you're good." Qin Mu looked down. "Didn't you say that you wanted to talk about something? Tell me." Zhou Chongguang's eyes flickered. The seduction had failed. She was no longer the little girl who blushed and couldn't help herself from kissing him. She had been very proactive during their first time. On the wedding night, he was drunk, but he knew that she had kissed him in her pajamas. That night, he had possessed her with a hint of resentment, not gently. On the wedding night, she had cried a lot, and only he knew how hypocritical his consolation had been. Now, he had spent a lot of effort to seduce her, but she wasn't moved. Her reaction was just a normal physiological reaction of a woman. As a man, he knew it very well. Zhou Chongguang was a little disappointed, but he quickly adjusted himself and smiled. I've invested in a reality show. The theme is to invite some business tycoons to participate and bring their wives. I think the ratings will be very high. Qin Mu's eyes widened. Zhou Chengwang, you're not thinking of asking me to participate with you, are you? I'll invite Yi Muyun to participate as well. He might bring Song Karen, but Zhao Yan doesn't have a girlfriend. Tang Cher will be his best choice. There won't be any scandals, and she's eye-catching enough. Zhou Chengwang looked at her and said, of course, you can disagree, but I won't invite the people before me. In the end, I'll invite some celebrities. Qin Mu looked at him warily. What are you up to? Do you think I'm that bad? He smiled. I'm just a man who wants to repair his relationship with his wife. She paused for a moment and said, or do you think your smart brother will be fooled by me? Zhou Chengwang said frankly, although Glory is doing well now, it's not even a third of Boyi's. I can't even sleep well if your brother stomps his feet. Why would I ask for trouble? Qin Mu still pursed her lips and didn't say anything. Take your time to think about it. I'll wait for your reply. He smiled and pinched her little face. Are you still staying at Wenhua Hotel? Mu, you can move back. I'll stay there. Qin Mu's face tensed up and he didn't seem to appreciate the gesture. No need. How is it convenient to stay in a hotel? He looked at her and said, besides, I'll feel sorry for you. Qin Mu said coldly, Zhou Chengwang, don't be a hypocrite. I'm not a little girl anymore. Yes, you've been Mrs. Zhou for a long time. I knew that on our wedding night. He deliberately provoked her. Qin Mu was naturally angry because he had lied to her before. When she was 14 years old, he said that they slept together, which meant that they had sex. But on their wedding night, she was in so much pain. What did that mean? Chapter 2162. Zhou Chengwang was well aware of Qin Mu's hateful expression. No matter how much she had changed, she was still as perceptive as a young girl when it came to relationships. Qin Mu glared at him. Zhou Chengwang, you don't have to mention your despicable past anymore. It will only make me hate you more. Really? When I kissed you just now, you didn't say that. He chuckled and reached out to touch her little face. As for Qin Mu, he awkwardly turned his head to the side. At this moment, her hair was slightly messy. A strand of hair was scattered over her shoulder, making her look a little mischievous. Zhou Chengwang brushed it aside for her. His eyes fell on the side of her face, and his heart palpitated. He had always known about his wife's beauty, but he had never appreciated it like this. Her beauty was tranquil and comfortable. Send me back to the hotel. Qin Mu suddenly turned her head and looked right into his deep eyes. At that moment, Zhou Chengwang was a little embarrassed. But after being in the business world for so many years, he was used to hiding himself. He just smiled faintly and started the car. In just a short while, he sent her to Wenhua Hotel. The car stopped, but he did not let her get out immediately. Instead, he grabbed her hand and said calmly, you said it. Think about it. Qin Mu's lips moved, but she did not say anything in the end. Zhou Chengwang let her get out of the car. He lit a cigarette and chuckled as he looked at Qin Mu, who was about to escape. Qin Mu ran back to her suite and closed the door. Her chest was still heaving up and down. Zhou Chengwang's offer was indeed very tempting to her. Her biggest wish now was for her brother to be with Cher again. If it were not for her, Cher would not have sacrificed herself. Later on, she secretly went to the US to look for Cher, but she could not find her. She knew that her brother was also searching until he gave up all hope. She even knew of Song Karen's existence, but it was probably her brother's self-deception. On one hand, he convinced himself that he had already forgotten Cher. On the other hand, he felt that if he had a girlfriend, Cher would probably dare to come back. Qin held her cell phone for a long time before she picked it up and dialed Zhou Chengguang's number. Her voice was repressed and restrained. Zhou Chengguang, I agree. But I have a condition. Before she could finish, she heard Zhou Chengguang's voice. With one hand on the steering wheel and the other holding the phone, he chuckled. I'm not allowed to touch you, am I? Qin silence proved that he had guessed correctly. Zhou Chengguang paused for a moment before he said slowly, Don't worry, I won't touch you unless you want me to, okay? Qin was annoyed. Zhou Chengguang, you're really shameless. He laughed calmly and said, Really? You used to say that I was the sunshine of your life. Have you changed so quickly? Qin was silent for a while before she said calmly, Zhou Chengguang, it's not that fast. 8 years is enough to change everything. This time, Zhou Chengguang could not laugh anymore. After hanging up, Qin stared at her cell phone in a daze. She did not know how Zhou Chengguang would invite her brother. From what she knew, her brother still deeply hated Zhou Chengguang. Also, why would Cher participate in a show that Zhou Chengguang invested in? Chapter 2163. However, there was a small hiccup in the middle. Song Karen and Lin Shui came over as well. They were each accompanied by a B-list male celebrity. Qin didn't mind it too much. She was disappointed in Zhou Chengguang anyway. She didn't have a problem with him doing whatever he wanted with Lin Shui. Lin Shui, on the other hand, felt a little guilty when she saw Qin. She didn't dare to act rashly when she looked at Zhou Chengguang. It's time for you to change your team members. Qin tone was mocking. Zhou Chengguang glared at the producer. What kind of work was this? The producer was also stunned. He was completely out of it. However, since they were already here and there were so many reporters today, it was impossible to change it. No matter what, they had to take care of their reputation. Zhao Yan and Shuai had always been together. Zhao Yan's gaze landed on Yimuyun. He saw that Yimuyun's gaze was like a little wolf dog staring at Shuai. He sighed inwardly. These two clearly have something going on, but they're not together. He had always disdained these kinds of shows. This time, he was doing it for Cher's happiness. He said in a low voice, Song Karen came with someone else. It seems that she and Yimuyun aren't as close as we thought. Cher glanced at him and snorted. That has nothing to do with me. That day, the hickey on Song Karen's neck was huge. How was it possible that they weren't intimate? She hadn't seen Yimuyun since that day. She was going to return to America immediately, but Zhao Yan asked her to take part in a show. She didn't expect to meet Yimuyun. At that moment, she could feel two burning gazes on her. She couldn't ignore them. Hearing her say that, Zhao Yan smiled and didn't say anything. When the reporters interviewed him and asked him about his relationship with Cher, Zhao Yan hugged Cher and said generously to the camera, "And is the girl I care about the most." As he said that, he leaned over and kissed her forehead. He also felt that Yimuyun's gaze couldn't wait to kill him. After the kiss, the scene of him kissing Cher became a trending topic. Who was ANN? Ranked first. Yimuyun narrowed his eyes and looked at Zhao Yan with a hint of jealousy. Yes, it was jealousy. If not for the fact that he was Cher's little uncle, he would have rushed up and punched Zhao Yan in the face. On the other side, Zhou Chengguang chuckled and whispered, "Look, aren't you envious that your Prince Charming is kissing someone else?" Qin gaze was indifferent. "Zhou Chengguang, you really know me well." She smiled and said, "But I seem to remember that Cher is your goddess. You don't feel uncomfortable, do you?" Although Zhou Chongguang had wanted to provoke her, he didn't expect to be ridiculed by her instead. At that moment, he felt a little uncomfortable. Their eyes met and happened to meet Gu Zai's dark eyes. Gu Zai didn't come because of him. It was Yi Muyun's request. Zhou Chongguang couldn't help but complain. What a pervert. Two grown men coming to participate in a reality show like this. However, this was also a big attraction. The Fujoshi in front of the TV would definitely like it. He looked at Gu Zai with a meaningful gaze, because he could tell that Gu Zai liked Qin Mu. He would never have a good impression of a man who liked his wife. However, Gu Zai was Gu Mei's brother. Chapter 2164. The production crew rented a bus and prepared to head to Dali, Yunnan. Before they left, they took away all the cash and cards they had on them. The production crew gave out some cash regularly. Including the staff, the bus was full. To the men and women who went in and out of the luxury car all day long, it was especially crowded and uncomfortable. Gu Zai and Yi Muyun were inseparable, sitting together. In front of them were Cher and Zhao Yan, while beside them were Song Karen and a male celebrity. Zhou Chongguang and Qin Mu sat at the back. Moreover, Zhou Chongguang sent that stupid woman, Lin Shui, to the front. What the eye doesn't see, the heart doesn't grieve over. He looked at the calm Qin Mu and smiled. You don't seem nervous. I remember telling you that every crew has a suite every night. Qin Mu was still unmoved. Didn't Zhou Zong find a woman to warm his bed? I don't have the habit of going out at night. His voice also became indifferent. Moreover, I want to be a good man now. Qin Mu ignored him. Zhou Chongguang didn't say anything either. The relationship between the husband and wife wasn't very harmonious. The drive from B City to Dali was a full 20 hours. They didn't find a place to rest in between and slept in the bus at night. This was a huge torture for everyone. The production crew explained that this was the first test. They wanted to see if the male partner could coax and take care of the female partner. Gu Zai looked at Yi Muyun and coughed lightly. Am I coaxing you or are you coaxing me? Yi Muyun pursed his lips and glared at him. Gu Zai touched his nose. All right. The bus continued to drive. Outside the window, it gradually became dark. Everyone only ate some bread and then went to sleep. This show is too inhumane. They don't even allow us to use our phones. Zhou Chongguang's former mistress, Lin Shui, complained. However, no one said anything after she said that. She was a little bored and didn't say anything else. Lin Shui was not an idiot. When she saw Tang Cher, she knew that she had become a substitute. So, Zhou Zong liked the ANN. So this reality show was organized for the ANN. Lin Shui was full of herself. In her heart, she was determined to beat ANN. Since he couldn't compete in face, he would compete in figure. With this thought in mind, Lin Shui pulled down her collar. However, she immediately felt that it was very cold, so she quickly pulled it up again. The car was quiet, the lights outside were bright, but the interior of the car was dim and flickering. It was especially quiet. Since they were sleeping in a sitting position, no one was comfortable. Cher tried to adjust her position countless times, but it was still uncomfortable. Especially her head. She felt uncomfortable no matter where she placed it. In the end, she gave up and leaned against the window. Yi Muyun watched her quietly from behind. His heart was filled with tenderness. Being close to her like this had been his dream for the past 8 years. Although he was still angry at her, he didn't want to think too much about it now. She was so close to him and within his reach. He kept staring at her. Naturally, he could tell that she was uncomfortable. His eyes were filled with heartache. She had been spoiled by him since she was young. How could she suffer like this? Therefore, he leaned over and adjusted her back by 30 degrees so that she could lie down and sleep. However, he would be very uncomfortable if she did that. Chapter 2165. How could Gu Zhe not see that Yi Muyun did this because he felt sorry for Zhao Yan, and also because he was afraid that Zhao Yan would lend his shoulder to share? How could Mr. Yi, who was always jealous, stand that kind of intimacy? His tone was full of ridicule. How could Yi Muyun not hear it? In the dark car, his voice was very light. Gu Zhe, if you want, come closer. Gu Zhe's expression was a little thought-provoking. A man who had been forbidden for too long was indeed abnormal. He pulled his clothes and coughed. We are in the same room but not in the same bed. Yi Muyun only glanced at him and didn't say anything. And their heavy conversation was heard by all the people in the car. Those who didn't know better would really think that they were a couple. Cher sat in front of Yi Muyun. She should be lying down now. She could see him a little if she slightly lifted her eyelids. He helped her put down the seat, so she was much more comfortable lying down. But she also knew that he wouldn't be too comfortable. With a height of 1.84 meters, it must be very hard for him to bend his long legs in such a narrow place. She originally wanted to shake her head, but Zhao Yan secretly held her hand and smiled. Cher tilted her face and looked at Zhao Yan with a puzzled look. Then, Zhao Yan did something inhumane. He also put down the seat and forced Gu Zhe to have nowhere to put his legs. After putting it down flat, he and Cher lay down together, and then they held hands and fell asleep. This simply stunned everyone. Yi Muyun's face was about to darken. Gu Zhe let out a long sigh. You killed me. Yi Muyun's voice was cold. You wanted to come. He couldn't be clearer why Gu Zhe wanted to come. It was because of his baby sister, Qin Mu. Qin Mu and Zhou Chongguang came together, but it could be seen that they were still in discord. She was probably willing to come because he wanted to reconcile with Cher. Zhou Chongguang's current thoughts. Yi Muyun found that Zhou Chongguang looked at Qin Mu in a different way. It wasn't hot, but it was the way a man looked at a woman. In the past, he looked at Qin Mu at most as a child. After all, when Qin Mu followed him, she was only 14 years old. What kind of love could there be? Yi Muyun had something on his mind, and he was really uncomfortable, so he couldn't sleep for the whole night. Gu Zhe was the same. The two men each had their own thoughts. There were so many people in the car, but they were the only ones with their eyes open. There were so many people in the car, and they were the only ones who had their eyes open. Yi Muyun, the last row was empty. Zhou Chongguang was selfish, and he and Qin Mu occupied 6 seats. Qin Mu was restrained at first, and she was only willing to sleep sitting, but she had never suffered like this before. After 12 o'clock, she curled up on 2 seats and slept lightly. The night was cold and even with a thin blanket over her, she was still shivering from the cold. Zhou Chongguang sat over and placed half of her body in his embrace. Qin Mu was still in a daze and didn't reject him. In the end, she hugged his waist and slept for the whole night. Zhou Chongguang didn't dare to move, because if he moved, she wouldn't feel safe. Really, since he was at his lowest, he had never tolerated a girl like this, nor had he been so good to anyone. He always thought that women could be bought with money. Chapter 2166. However, he couldn't buy Qin Mu, so he could only put in some effort. Wasn't she lying obediently in his arms now? At 2 o'clock in the morning, the chauffeur drove the car to the rest stop. He needed to go to the toilet and drink some water. There would be a short 10-minute break. Gu Zhe and Yi Muyun looked at each other and decided to get out of the car to relax. Just as he got up, Gu Zhe's gaze fell on the last row. He saw Qin Mu hugging Zhou Chongguang and sleeping peacefully in his arms. Zhou Chongguang lowered his eyes and looked at his wife quietly. If he hadn't known about their past, Gu Zhe would have thought that they were a loving couple. He looked at them and felt bitter. He stopped looking at them and got out of the car with Yi Muyun. The two of them each had a cigarette and lit it in the late autumn night. The scarlet-red dots rose and fell. Yi Muyun smiled. "Why did you come here?" They had been observing Zhou Chongguang's methods for the past few years, so it wasn't like they didn't know about it. Most of them walked some crooked paths, but they were really useful. For example, when it came to dealing with women, Zhou Chongguang was more of a jerk than any of them. However, after playing outside for a while, he used some tricks to make Qin Mu come out with him obediently. At the same time, Zhou Chongguang gave Yi Muyun, the biggest opponent, a big carrot, so that he couldn't object even if he wanted to. Gu Zhe smiled bitterly and said, "I'm the same as you. I can't control myself." Yi Muyun sighed and said, "Gu Zhe, if Qin Mu still insists on being with Zhou Chongguang, I won't object. Firstly, because of Qin Mu's illness, he wanted her to do whatever she wanted. Secondly, he really saw the change in Zhou Chongguang. It was a good start that he was willing to put in so much effort for a woman. Of course, he still hated Zhou Chongguang. If he had the chance, he still wanted to kill him." Gu Zhe paused for a moment, then took a long drag on his cigarette. "I just want her to live a good life. Qin Mu isn't an idiot," Yi Muyun said softly. "She should have noticed it a long time ago." From the bottom of his heart, Yi Muyun also didn't want Gu Zhe to hang on to Qin Mu. He didn't think highly of it, nor did he agree. Gu Zhe just smoked hard and didn't say anything. The two men looked at the white skyline in the darkness. After smoking 2 cigarettes, they followed the driver into the car. Those who should be sleeping were all sleeping, and those who couldn't sleep still couldn't sleep. After they sat down, Cher was awake, or rather, she didn't sleep at all. She couldn't sleep beside Yi Muyun. That feeling was like there was a thorn beside her, and there was a sharp pain at any time. She turned her little face to the direction of the window and looked at the boundless night. She thought of what Song Karen said to her shyly before they got into the car. Muyun said that he wanted to switch with Gu Zhe during the evening party. "He'll be sharing a room with me." There was a glint in the corner of Cher's eyes. Since he and Song Karen were in love, why would he do such a considerate thing to her? If it wasn't for Zhao Yan's public image, she would have turned around and left. She especially didn't want to see Song Karen's delicate and timid look. That smile was very glaring. As she thought about it, her hand tightened. She heard Zhao Yan's low laugh. "Don't waste such a good seat. Sleep." Snow grunted in acknowledgement, then lay down on her side. Chapter 2167. Snow grunted in acknowledgement, then lay down on her side. Zhao Yan also turned around and hugged her waist from behind. The two of them were covered with a blanket, just like a normal young couple. Late at night, the staff of the program team suddenly opened their eyes like copper bells. They gently set up the camera and took pictures of the couples sleeping one by one. Zhou Chongguang and Qin Mu's team was quite aesthetically pleasing, but Zhao Yan and Shui Er's team was more romantic. Everything else was still passable. Only Gu Zhe and Yi Muyun, these two men, were glaring at the camera in the dark with unfriendly expressions. These clips would be posted on the official Weibo in real time. Zhao Yan and Ann, once again, became the second most searched topic. The first was Gu Zhe and Yi Muyun, because their expressions were There were 74 million likes under that Weibo post. Of the 230,000 comments, half of them were asking for Guze and Yi Muyun to really be together. Previously, when Mr. Ye's girlfriend, Song Karen, was rumored to have been instantly destroyed, the onlookers didn't seem to think highly of them. Although they were traveling together, they didn't feel like a CP at all. Instead, they felt that Guze and Yi Muyun were both very good-looking and had a sense of beauty. Also, the scene of them smoking together in the middle of the night was even more beautiful than the international blockbuster of Hu and Hua. Just like that, Yi Muyun and Guze, these two business elites, were famous beyond reason. The bus arrived at Dali, Yunnan, and they checked into the Shangri-La Hotel. The program team also followed the original plan and arranged a suite for each couple. But when everyone went in, they found that there was only one bed. Guze, Mr. Yi, you're a high-ranking official. You can sleep on the bed, and I'll sleep on the sofa. Xiao Yan, my dear Cher, why don't you and little uncle sleep together? Song Karen, I don't sleep on the sofa. Lin Shui, 1 million, I'll sleep with you tonight. Qin Mu, Zhou Chongguang, what kind of show is this? Can't you afford 2 beds? Zhou Chongguang was packing his things because Qin Mu was not good at this kind of thing. She was very gentle, but she was really a rich young lady. After coming out, she only cared about lying by the window and looking at the scenery. He was the one who packed the luggage. Hearing her words, he winked and smiled. I've said it before. Unless you want it, I won't force you. Qin Mu made up her mind. You sleep on the sofa. Zhou Chongguang had no objections. But if you sleep next to me, don't say that I'm shameless. Qin Mu snorted and ignored him. There was a deep meaning in his gaze. Qin Mu did not know that she actually had a nocturnal ability. She would sometimes run around at night. She would find the hottest thing and hug it to sleep. They had been married for several years, so he knew this little problem very well. Because she would not leave the room, he did not have the intention to tell her. He paused for a moment. Let me tell you something else. Every night at midnight, the production team will carry the camera into the room to film. Qin Mu exploded. What a pervert. What if someone is doing that kind of thing? His gaze suddenly became deep. Qin Mu, other than us, who else do you think has the possibility of doing this? Qin Mu was even more infuriated, and he threw something over. At that moment, the door to the room opened, and the camera pointed at them. Chapter 2168. Qin Mu struggled desperately. She resisted with all her might and whispered that she didn't want to. However, Zhou Chongguang hugged her tightly and pressed his thin lips against hers again and again. Qin Mu pursed his lips, not letting him have his way. His eyes were wide open as he stared at him. However, Zhou Chongguang's expression was quite intoxicated. He kissed her lips and said in a seductive voice, "Close your eyes. I'm filming." Qin Mu's eyes widened and her voice was muffled. Zhou Chongguang, I told you that I won't cooperate with your shameless request. With that, she wanted to push him. Zhou Chongguang hugged her forcefully and held her waist. He chuckled and said, "You said that you wouldn't go to bed with me, but you didn't say that you wouldn't kiss me." Qin Mu glared at him and reached out to slap him. Zhou Chongguang raised his hand and gestured for them to turn off the camera. He was the boss behind the scenes, so the staff naturally listened to him. Thus, they quickly turned off the camera and left. When the door closed, Zhou Chongguang's handsome face was immediately slapped. Qin Mu's breathing was slightly chaotic. She raised her head and glared at him. If there's a next time, her little hand was caught. Zhou Chongguang chuckled and said, "You still want to slap me?" He held her little hand and rubbed it gently. Her little hand was particularly soft and her fingers were slender and smooth. She had never done housework before. Qin Mu struggled, but she couldn't break free. Moo moo, if I kiss you again now. He lowered his head and slowly approached her. Qin Mu used her free hand to slap him, but he stopped her in the middle. Both of her hands were gripped by his. Zhou Chongguang, what do you want to do? Qin Mu struggled with all her might, but she couldn't break free. She could only stare at him. Zhou Chongguang pressed his lips against hers and whispered, Qin Mu, I just don't want others to see me forcing you. As he spoke, he chuckled softly. As for what I want to do, his voice became softer. I want to make love. As he spoke, he picked her up and threw her onto the pure white bed. Qin Mu struggled to get up, but he immediately turned her over and stuck close to her. Zhou Chongguang. Qin Mu bit her lip and turned her face away. Get up. His gaze was dark as he stared at her little face. After a long time, he said in a hoarse voice, Kiss me and I'll let you go. She turned and glared at him. Or, I'll kiss you. Zhou Chongguang lowered his head and kissed her lips. His movements were very gentle and forceful as he pried open her. She struggled, so he pinned her firmly and kissed her fiercely. It was as if a gust of wind had passed through. When he let go of her, she was already on the verge of death. Qin Mu lay down and didn't move at all. He didn't want her, but the way he kissed her made her feel ashamed. Zhou Chongguang slowly got up, knelt on both sides of her body, and gazed at her. Her long hair was spread on the side of the pillow, and her black hair was wrapped around the white pillow. Her features were clean. Zhou Chongguang looked at her and felt warm in his heart. He lowered his head and kissed her face, whispering without any emotion, Mumu, let's be together, shall we? As he spoke, he propped up his body slightly and looked at his little wife. Qin Mu was very young. She married him at the age of 18. She had been Mrs. Zhou for 4 years, but she was only 22 years old now. At her age, many girls hadn't started to fall in love yet, but she had already experienced a lot. Chapter 2169. He couldn't help kissing her again. As he kissed her, he whispered, Mumu, I won't bully you in the future. Be good and don't mention the divorce, okay? Qin Mu let him kiss her because she knew that she couldn't avoid it. If she resisted, he would probably lose his last bit of rationality. Zhou Chongguang kissed her for a long time. Mumu, huh? Qin Mu closed her eyes and smiled. Zhou Chongguang, I'm not a cat or dog, and I won't go with you just because you give me a bone. She opened her eyes. I know your goal. It's nothing more than to make me Mrs. Zhou, who won't fight or quarrel. And how many days can you be loyal to me? She chuckled again. Actually, you're wrong. It's not about whether you're loyal or not, but I don't love you anymore. So, he didn't need to show his loyalty to her. Zhou Chongguang's expression was a little ugly. He kept looking at Qin Mu and said slowly, Qin Mu, I can have you now. Yes. But what about after that? Tie me to the bed. Qin Mu sneered. Zhou Chongguang, don't do such a tasteless thing. I'll look down on you. The veins on his forehead were popping out. They had been together for 8 years, and she had never spoken to him like this. To be honest, he felt very uncomfortable. She used to be such a docile little girl. No matter what he said, she would hold her chin and look at him with admiration in her eyes. Her eyes seemed to be full of little stars. Zhou Chongguang pursed his thin lips and sneered. I only need to have you. Her eyes narrowed and she stared at him, afraid that he would do something. However, Zhou Chongguang still didn't do anything. After a moment, he left the bed, and even the room. In the evening, the sky was full of colorful clouds. The hotel was built by the sea. As soon as they walked out of the hotel, they could see the entire sea. Zhou Chongguang stood there in a white t-shirt and black beach pants. Lin Shuai smiled and walked over. She placed her slender arm on Zhou Chongguang's shoulder and whispered, "Zhou Zong, why did Mrs. Zhou kick you out?" Zhou Chongguang tilted his head and glanced at the seductive woman. He didn't say anything and continued to blow out a smoke ring. Seeing that he did not push her away, Lin Shuai felt a glimmer of hope. She hugged Zhou Chongguang from behind and buried her face in his back. "Chongguang, I've always liked you. It has nothing to do with your power or money." She lifted her head and tiptoed to kiss his neck. Her voice was particularly seductive. "I don't care about our status. I can always be the woman behind your back. But I don't want to." Zhou Chongguang narrowed his eyes and said in a low voice. Lin Shuai was stunned. She instinctively wanted to let go, but then she saw Qin Mu sitting opposite her. Zhou Chongguang was also stunned. Qin Mu had already changed her clothes. She was wearing a white floral dress. She probably came out to get some fresh air, not to look for him. But unfortunately, he saw such a scene. Even when he was caught on the spot in the office last time, Zhou Chongguang had not been so flustered. He immediately pushed Lin Shuai away and coughed softly. "Mu, it's not what you see. It doesn't matter what it is." Qin Mu looked at Lin Shuai and said, "If Miss Lin needs it, I can make room for you tonight." Chapter 2170. Zhou Chongguang put the cigarette in his mouth and took a puff. He looked at Qin Mu with a frown. "It's windy here. Don't stay here for too long." "Did I disturb you?" Qin Mu said coldly. Then, she walked towards Zhao Yan and Cher's room. Zhou Chongguang stopped her. "Qin Mu." She paused. "Remember that you're a married woman. Isn't it inappropriate for you to go to a single man's bedroom like this?" He walked slowly to her and pinched her cheek. "Or is it because of what happened just now, so Mrs. Zhou wants an eye for an eye? I'm not as lame as you." Qin Mu pushed his hand away. "Zhou Chongguang, don't think that everyone is as shameless as you." After that, she wanted to leave, but he caught her. Zhou Chongguang frowned and stared at her eyes, but he didn't say a word. After a long time, he let go of her and smiled. "Remember to come back early." He looked at his watch. "It's 6:00 now. We'll have dinner at 7:00. Qin Mu broke away from him and ignored his words. Zhou Chongguang watched her leave and smiled. She had really grown up and had a personality. She didn't listen to him anymore. He smoked the cigarette quietly and thought that he probably couldn't let her go. It wasn't because she was the best candidate for Mrs. Zhou, nor was it because he was too lazy to get a divorce. It was because Qin Mu was quite cute when she threw a tantrum. Married life seemed to be much more interesting. After they were about to get a divorce, and Qin Mu went to Zhao Yan and Cher's room just to take a look and talk to Cher. Along the way, her brother didn't seem to take the initiative. They didn't talk. Moreover, Zhou Chongguang, that bastard, arranged Song Karen's room and her brother's room next door. And the celebrity who came with Song Karen was missing, Zhou Chongguang, that bastard. She knocked on the door and entered. It was Cher who opened the door. She was a little surprised to see Qin Mu. Zhao Yan, on the other hand, was adjusting a piano. He was squatting down, revealing only his back. Qin Mu looked at Cher. "Can we talk?" Cher smiled and looked back at Zhao Yan. "I'll go out with Mu for a while. There are many wolves outside, be careful." Zhao Yan raised his head and said. Cher paused and then said softly, "I'll be back before dinner." Zhao Yan's voice was vague. Don't become someone else's dinner. Cher didn't hear it clearly, and Zhao Yan didn't say anything else. The two girls were walking on the beach when they bumped into Zhou Chengwang. It was the first time in 8 years that the three of them were in the same frame. Qin Mu tilted her head and whispered, "We still have to divorce. Cher, think about your brother. I know you did it for me 8 years ago, but he waited for you for so long." Cher was silent for a while and sighed. "Mumu, your brother already has Song Karen. And I can't be with him." As she spoke, she smiled bitterly and met the gaze of Yi Muyun, who was not far away. He had been standing alone by the sea for a long time, and suddenly saw her. Qin Mu's voice became lower. "I only know that you've always been in his heart, and only you." Then she whispered, "In recent years, my brother has lost a lot of weight. He always forgets to eat, and he even has stomach problems." Cher's eyes widened. Chapter 2171. After Qin Mu finished speaking, Cher's eyes fell on Yi Muyun. After a long time, she said in a hoarse voice, "Song Karen will take care of him from now on." Qin Mu was stunned for a moment, and then she immediately said, "Brother and Song Karen haven't reached that step yet. He hasn't brought Song Karen home." She continued, "He has waited for 8 years. I don't think he has given up yet." They were so frank, and Cher's heart also became a little gloomy. 8 years was not a pleasant topic to talk about. She didn't hate Qin Mu, not at all. How could she blame a little girl who knew nothing? Besides, no matter how precious love was, it was not as precious as life. She was Yi Muyun's sister. She had been the same as her sister at the beginning. She would not watch her get hurt. Even if she was the one who got hurt in the end. She didn't blame anyone. She just wanted to live a peaceful life. She just wanted to be able to calmly say, "Long time no see," to her old friends when she set foot on the land of B City one day. Cher remembered the kiss mark on Song Karen's neck that day and smiled bitterly. Mumu, in fact, sometimes, people will be lonely. Yi Muyun was the same. He had Song Karen, and it was only natural that something happened between them. Qin Mu frowned. She always felt that she and Cher were not on the same channel. It seemed that no matter what she said, Cher would not be moved. Didn't the book say that the trick of self-injury was the best way to move a woman's heart? Cher must still have feelings for her brother. Why was Cher so determined to go back to the United States even though she had said so miserably? Qin Mu had no other way for the time being, so she pursed her lips and did not say anything. In the distance, Zhou Chengwang looked at Qin Mu and Cher and watched his little wife saying something. He naturally knew what she was up to. It was nothing more than to make Yi Muyun and Tang Cher reconcile. In fact, he was no longer an obstacle between them. Yi Muyun also knew this. People change. In Zhou Chengwang's world, there was no such thing as pure hatred. He began to live in the secular world, but it didn't mean that he had given up everything. Rather, he had learned to compromise and learn the way that was most beneficial to him. Just like between him and Qin Mu, only when Yi Muyun and Tang Cher reconciled, Qin Mu might let go of her hatred towards him. Yes, she hated him. Although she didn't show it, he could feel it. At this moment, he looked at his little wife's helpless expression and felt that she was very cute. Zhou Chengwang smiled, stepped forward, grabbed Qin Mu's hand, and said to Cher, "I'll take Mumu back to the room first. She will have a headache if she stays in the sea breeze for a long time." Qin Mu struggled and looked at Cher for help. "Don't you want them to reconcile? Do you think they will have a chance to reconcile if you stand here like a third wheel?" Zhou Chengwang chuckled and pulled her away when she was stunned. When Cher was about to leave, Yi Muyun came over and said, "What? Don't you want to say a word to me?" She stopped and turned to look at him. I'm afraid that Miss Song will misunderstand. She won't. Yi Muyun's voice was very calm. We are brother and sister. His words were almost shameless. Cher glared at him. You can do it, but I can't. Chapter 2172. If this can satisfy your vanity. Cher murmured, Yi Muyun, don't flirt with others when you're with her. You should have seen Zhou Chongguang and Qin Mu as examples. With that said, she raised her eyes and stared at him. After this reality show ends, I will return to America. Yi Muyun suddenly said, Zhou Chongguang told me that you'll be participating in the show, so I came. His words surprised her a little. Did he mean that he and Zhou Chongguang had reconciled? Otherwise, why do you think I'd come to participate in such a lousy show? Yi Muyun's gaze was deep as he stared into her eyes. Also, don't mention Song Karen in the future. We've broken up. Speaking of this, he was reminded of that night when she had sent Song Karen to his apartment, and he was a little annoyed. And the young lady who had infuriated him was right in front of him. He reached out and grabbed her, and she fell into his arms. Yi Muyun. She cried out in surprise. Her small hands became small fists as she punched him. Yi Muyun pressed her against him forcefully, letting her do whatever she wanted. After 8 years, his body had become a lot stronger. He was no longer that handsome young man, but a strong man. The sea breeze was very cold, and his body was too hot. Cher was in a world of ice and fire. She punched him continuously and said, You've already broken up with her. Why are you still touching her? Touching her? Yi Muyun frowned. Which eye of yours saw which hand of mine touched her? Cher was still fooling around, and he held her hand with one hand. Tang Cher, speak clearly. His handsome face was grim. That night, you were the one who sent her to my apartment. Are you jealous now? Her little hand was caught by him. He held it too tightly. She felt a little pain, but she couldn't break free. I didn't touch her, not even a finger. He emphasized, staring into her eyes. Who told you that I touched her? Cher was a little pretentious. There was nothing between them, and she had no right to comment on his private life. She had to admit that she was jealous and uncomfortable, but she couldn't say it. She didn't say anything. Yi Muyun's expression became even more unsightly. She told you. No, she could only say weakly. Yi Muyun stared at her sharply, confirming that it was Song Karen who said it. He stared at her for a long time before coldly saying, Idiot. With that, he pulled her into his arms and kissed her angrily. He didn't give her the slightest chance to struggle. He directly locked her arms and held her in his arms as if he was holding a little doll. He kissed her deeply. Her little head kept tilting back, almost breaking in half. And he kept moving forward, holding her little head with one hand, not giving her a chance to move, and just like that, the kiss became even deeper, so much so that it made one's hair stand on end. She finally couldn't take it anymore, shaking her little head and moaning. But he was kissing her so passionately and intoxicated. He had missed her for so long in this kiss, so how could he bear to let go of her? When he finally let go of her, she could barely stand. She collapsed in his arms, panting violently. Yi Muyun's fingers stroked her little mouth gently, and his entire heart felt like it was about to jump out. Chapter 2173. Only in front of her would he have such a passionate reaction. He even wanted to pick her up and have her. Then, he carried her horizontally and walked towards his room. Meanwhile, the cameraman of the production team secretly aimed at them. He returned to the hotel room as fast as he could. The door was locked, and she was kissed behind the door. The man who had endured for 8 years could not be rejected. Even when she cried and begged him not to, he did not let her go. From the beginning to the end, Cher did not know how it happened. She only knew that he kissed her, and her head was dizzy. Then, behind the door of the suite, something that should not have happened. After 8 years, that feeling was stronger than before. She did not know whether it was because he was getting older or because he had more experience. Anyway, it was completely different from 8 years ago. She blossomed in his arms and felt that she had finally become a woman. He took her to the storm, and they drifted on a small boat. Unable to find the shore, she could only hold on to him tightly, as if she was holding on to the last piece of driftwood. From 6 to 10 o'clock, he kept pestering her. Sweat stained the whole sheet, and when he finally let go of her, they were like two fish. Snow slowly closed her eyes, still lost in the aftertaste of the song. He kissed her forehead and murmured, "That night, I didn't touch her. I never touched her." He said a lot. Sometimes she was awake, and sometimes she was blurry, but most of them were words of longing. Her body was a little stiff. When the sweat turned cold, she was shocked to realize that they had sex. Her fingers clenched the sheet, and her little mouth became a little pale. She trembled helplessly. "Yi Muyun, it's not right for us to do this." He was still kissing her little mouth, and he said in a low voice, "I said that I never touched her. Schwa I promise that everything I've said is the truth." He bit her little mouth. "Although I was very angry, I didn't sleep that night and let her stay in the guest room." Cher opened her eyes. "What's with the hickey on her neck?" "Hickey?" Yi Muyun frowned. "I don't know. Maybe we can ask Song Karen in person." Cher didn't have the face to ask. After a while, she bit her lip and said, "Let's just treat what happened today as an accident." She wanted to get up, but he hugged her waist. Perhaps it was because Yu had finally been released. His temper was especially good. He kissed her neck and said, "Be good, I'll carry you to the bathroom." Cher didn't move. After a while, she said in a low voice, "I'll still go back to America." Yi Muyun frowned. "You responded just now, and you even enjoyed it." Her reaction couldn't lie. She liked that he loved her. When they were doing it just now, she whispered that she missed him. Cher curled up at the head of the bed and wrapped herself in the bedsheet. Her voice was soft. "No." She looked at him and said seriously, "I'm used to being alone. I'm used to living in America." "I can go with you to America," he said without thinking. Schwaber looked up at him. He had a serious expression on his face. "Let me think about it," she said in a low voice and ran into the bathroom as though she was escaping. Yi Muyun didn't chase after her immediately. He just casually lit a cigarette. Actually, his body wasn't satisfied yet. He still wanted her. Chapter 2174. Guzé had been standing guard outside the door for hours. From the moment they entered, Guzé couldn't return home. At this moment, he heard Yi Muyun's words and paused for a moment. "Mr. Yi, a camera caught you and Cher going back to the room together just now." Yi Muyun narrowed his eyes and said calmly, "Find a room outside tonight." Guzé was stunned. How could there be such a thing? But thinking about it, Mr. Yi had probably been holding it in for a long time. Just as Yi Muyun finished speaking, Cher came out of the bathroom, already dressed. "I have to go." She wanted to leave, but how could he let her go so easily? He reached out to stop her and said hoarsely, "The camera is outside. Do you want to go out now and be caught?" Cher glared at him. "Sleep first." "I'll sleep on the sofa." His tone was calm, but as domineering as before. "I'll call you tomorrow morning." Since they had already done it, she wouldn't be bashful anymore. But she still asked, "Where's Guzay?" "Why? Do you still want to be in a room with two men?" he asked coldly in an unfriendly tone. Cher picked up a pillow beside her and threw it at his face. "Yi Muyun, you're shameless." He took the pillow away expressionlessly and walked towards the sofa with it in his hand. He turned off the lights. The sudden darkness made Cher a little uncomfortable. She stood in the dark for a long time before she finally moved her body and lay on the bed carefully. But she was still a little afraid, so she didn't dare to fall asleep. In the darkness, she heard his voice. "I won't touch you again." He probably felt that his words weren't convincing enough, so he added, "I'm exhausted." Even in the darkness, even if he couldn't see, Cher's face was still red and burning. She buried her face in the pillow. There seemed to be a faint male scent on it. It was his scent. That kind of pure masculine breath made her blush and her heart beat faster. As she buried her face, she felt that her face was getting hotter. How could she fall asleep? After all, they were in the same space, and they used to be so intimate. Not to mention, they just had sex. Cher buried her face and closed her eyes. All she could see was the scene of them hugging each other. She bit her lip and buried her face even deeper. She even felt a little embarrassed. She was no longer a little girl. Just because they had sex once, she was shaken. "Tang Cher, have you forgotten that you still have to go back to America?" The night deepened. In the dark bedroom, her breathing finally calmed down. But Yi Muyun couldn't sleep the whole night. On the other side, Guzay hung up the phone and looked at the moon. Then, he saw a beautiful figure by the sea. It was Qin Mu. Why was she sitting on the beach at this hour? Moreover, the sea breeze was strong, and she was still wearing a thin layer of clothing. Guzay pursed his lips and walked over slowly. He sat down beside her and copied her action of throwing a pebble into the sea. The sea was so deep that the bottom couldn't be seen. "Guzay, you also think that a pebble can't change anything, right?" Qin Mu's voice was very low. "Do you think I'm stupid?" For her brother and Cher, she didn't hesitate to be alone with Zhou Chongguang. But she didn't want to be with Zhou Chongguang on a night like this. She would rather come out to see the sea, even though it was cold. Chapter 2175. Guzay's gaze had been on the sea, but he looked away and smiled faintly. "No, you're fine." He took off his shirt and put it on her shoulders. Qin Mu looked at it and wanted to take it off, but Guzay stopped her. "After you catch a cold, I think Zhou Chongguang will take care of you." Qin Mu glared at him. He really knew how to pick on her sore spot. In the end, she still put on his shirt, looked at the sea quietly, and threw pebbles silently. Guzay was only wearing a singlet as he sat next to her. He would look at her side profile from time to time. Her expression was focused, and she would throw a pebble from time to time. Guzay thought that Qin Mu was actually still a little girl. She had endured things that she shouldn't have, and it was still the same even now. "I apologize on behalf of Gu Mei." Guzay looked at her sideways and said mildly. Qin Mu smiled. "There's nothing to apologize for. Zhou Chongguang was never my lover. There's no point in me staying with a man who doesn't love me." She paused for a moment and continued, "Even without Gu Mei, there's still Lin Xue and Zhao Xue. He'll never lack women by his side." Guzay looked down. "But the harm that Gu Mei did to you is real." "Harm?" Qin Mu sighed softly. "Probably in the past, but now I really don't care." She looked at the endless dark blue sea and smiled faintly. "Guzay, I just want to end all of this as soon as possible and start a new life abroad. She stretched and turned her head to look at him. Her eyes were clear and bright, like stars in the night sky. Guzé looked at her and couldn't help but feel a little lost. After a long time, he said in a low voice, "Can I go abroad to see you?" Qinmu broke into a smile. Her smile bloomed in the dark night, as beautiful as a spider lily. She said, "Guzé, you can't. We are not friends." Guzé looked at the sea again. His expression was a little deep. After a long time, he said in a low voice, "I don't want to be friends with you." However, he knew that it was impossible for them to progress to the final step. Even if she didn't hate Gumei, she wouldn't be able to accept him. Furthermore, she and Zhou Chongwang weren't clear. Qinmu didn't say anything more. There was no need for them to have a deep conversation. Sitting together like this was already their limit. Perhaps they were too lonely, so they sat there until 2:00 at night. It was too cold, so he suggested, "Let me take you back to your room." Qinmu shook her head. "I don't want to go back." Guzé didn't want her to be alone with Zhou Chongwang, but he didn't want her to catch a cold. So he got up and pulled her up. "I'm looking for a room for you." With that said, he smiled. "I'm the same as you, homeless." Qinmu's eyes widened. "As you think, Cher and Mr. Yi are together," Guzé said vaguely. Qinmu's eyes widened like a little girl's. Guzé smiled faintly. "I'm going to get a room too." He gave her a light push on her back. Qinmu was still in a daze, so Guzé brought her to the hotel. Guzé asked for 2 suites from the receptionist. The receptionist said awkwardly, "I'm sorry, Mr. Gu. We only have 1 room left tonight." Chapter 2176. Guzé immediately held her slender arm. "Qinmu." His voice was a little anxious. Qinmu tilted her head to look at him and said slowly, "Mr. Gu, even if I'm going to divorce Zhou Chongwang, I can't possibly stay in the same room with a man who's practically a stranger." She was no longer a 14-year-old girl who could easily fall in love. She thought that based on Guzé's looks and temperament, if it wasn't for Zhou Chongwang, the 22-year-old Qinmu might have fallen for him. However, there were no ifs in life. It was impossible. It was impossible. Guzé's eyes were as dark as the night. He looked at her quietly for a while before saying, "You stay alone." His voice was especially calm and decisive. Qinmu's heart was slightly disturbed, but she still shook her head. "Guzé, you stay here. I can go back to my room." She knew that he was worried that she would catch a cold, so in order to appease him, she was willing to stay in the same room with Zhou Chongwang. Guzé's fingers tightened slightly, and his gaze became a little unpredictable. Qinmu knew that he liked her, but it was only now that she realized how passionate his feelings were. She didn't want to be tainted by him, and she didn't want to owe anyone anything. So after staring at him for a long time, she suddenly pushed him away and ran to her room. Guzé clenched his fingers tightly, looking at her disappearing figure in the dark night. How could he not know what she was thinking? Qinmu just wanted to avoid him. So silly. He took his room card and walked in her direction. He saw Zhou Chongwang open the door, and saw Zhou Chongwang pull her in. Guzé stood at the door of their bedroom, almost masochistically. He looked at the door and thought about all the things that had happened behind it. He liked a girl, and before he realized it, he had liked her for a long time. By the time he realized it, it was too late to stop, and he didn't want to. Because looking at her from afar, she had become his little happiness. How could he bear to stop? God knew how happy he was when he heard that she and Zhou Chongwang were going to divorce. Because he and she had an extra 1 in a million chance. Inside the room, Zhou Chengguang was wearing a white bathrobe, pulling Qin Mu into his arms. Qin Mu struggled. Zhou Chengguang, are you crazy? He didn't make a sound. He just pressed her between the door and his body and stared at her with a judgmental gaze. Qin Mu's back slammed into the door, and it hurt a little. You spent the whole night reflecting and came back at 1 in the morning wearing men's clothes, huh? Zhou Chengguang's expression was very unpleasant. He pressed her down with one hand and peeled off the men's shirts with the other. Qin Mu's body trembled. Only then did she remember that she came back wearing Gu Zai's clothes. Looking up, she pursed her lips and looked at Zhou Chengguang's handsome but twisted face. Someone lent it to me because I'm cold. Did he have any other thoughts about you, huh? Zhou Chengguang leaned forward, and his large palm had already started to check his territory to see if it had been occupied by other men. Qin Mu almost screamed. She looked at Zhou Chengguang in disbelief, and then she started to struggle violently. Zhou Chengguang, you bastard, let go of me. Zhou Chengguang checked thoroughly and firmly. His handsome face didn't have a trace of softness as he tormented her roughly. I have to ensure that my wife's body and mind belong to me. Chapter 2177. Zhou Chengguang's gaze deepened. He stared at her little face and sneered, is that so? Legally speaking, you're still my wife. He paused for a moment before he said mercilessly, which means that whatever I want to do to you is legal. Qin Mu's expression changed instantly. She looked at him and almost screamed, Zhou Chengguang, you can't. His voice was firm. You know I can. He pressed down on her, leaned over and whispered into her ear, Qin Mu, do you think Gu Zai is outside right now? His fingers pinched her little face shamelessly. If I want you now, will he give up? Qin Mu's body trembled slightly. She looked up at him and said, Zhou Chengguang, you bastard. He pinched her little face and said in a deep voice, wouldn't I be letting you down if I don't do some bastard things? Ha! He lowered his head and kissed her little mouth, swallowing all her resistance. Qin Mu struggled, but he held her wrist firmly and pinned her body to the door. He sealed her little mouth and forcefully took her. Qin Mu's tears fell. She looked at him accusingly with her watery eyes, but she couldn't stop him. Zhou Chengguang was extremely tough. He rarely treated her in such a domineering manner, especially in bed. But now, he was pressing down on her without a care in the world, crushing her broken voice. Outside the door, Gu Zai was standing and naturally heard the sounds behind the door. Zhou Chengguang probably knew about it and was doing it on purpose for him to see. His fingers slowly clenched. At that moment, he almost wanted to rush in and stop Zhou Chengguang. But what was he, Gu Zai? He didn't have any standpoint. He was even Zhou Chengguang's brother who was having an affair. If he rushed in, how ironic would that be? Gu Zai stood there for a very, very long time. He did not know if it was half an hour or an hour. He only knew that the sex in the room had not stopped. Zhou Chengguang was very good at this. As a man, Gu Zai could feel it through the door. Did Qin Mu endure it for 4 years? When Gu Zai left, his heart was as wet as water. Instead of returning to his room, he went to the seaside where he and Qin Mu had sat before. He sat there alone, looking at the sea, throwing stones, imagining a little girl sitting next to him. In the suite, after a long time, Zhou Chengguang finally let go of Qin Mu. As soon as he let go of her, her body slowly slid down, so Zhou Chengguang hugged her again and said in a low voice, "Are you sad?" Qin Mu did not want to talk to him. She turned her face to the side, and there were traces of tears on her little face. Zhou Chengguang's heart didn't feel very good. Did she really not like him? However, seeing her helpless look, his heart softened a little. No matter what, he was the one who bullied her. He reached out and carried her back to the bed. He knelt beside her and lifted her long hair, revealing her little face. Naturally, Chin-moo was still angry. She ignored him and turned her little face to the side. However, it was probably because it was really painful. Her tears rolled down again, and they did not stop. "Why are you crying again? Does it hurt?" he asked in a very low voice with a little more tenderness in his heart. "You're tuning into the LoveLore Library YouTube channel. We're so grateful for your support, and don't forget to subscribe to join us on this incredible journey through captivating stories. Your generosity through donations truly makes a world of difference, as it's the primary source of revenue that allows me to expand and enhance this channel for you. Thank you from the bottom of my heart for being a part of this adventure."